After Rome defeats Carthage, it continues to grow, expand, and conquer Europe, North Africa, Western Asia, gets up into England. It becomes one of the larger empires in the history of the world. As you can see on the map, it extends from modern-day Portugal and North Africa all the way up to northern England, all the way up to Germany, all the way into Mesopotamia, Egypt, Israel, all these places. It begins this period of conquest and expansion as a republic, which we described yesterday. It ends it as an empire, and what we're going to look over today is exactly how it transformed from a republic to an empire. Very broadly, this is the story of how the Senate loses power to an all-powerful emperor. Just like yesterday, I want to show you the words and the names that I'm going to expect you to know. You got triumvirate, dictator. Crassus is a person. Pompey, Julius Caesar, those are all people. Octavian and Augustus is actually the same person. I'll tell you about that later. Antony, Nero, these are all people. And the Pax Romana is a period of time. These are the terms. Probably ought to write these down and then just fill in quick notes to yourself about who they are or why they are important. You'll remember from yesterday that Rome is made up of patricians and plebeians, and that tension exists between these rich people and these poor people. Well, those tensions spill over into some civil wars. So there's some civil war and some fightings, very roughly between the rich and the poor. And following the civil wars, this group takes over. So following these civil wars, the first triumvirate takes over the rule of Rome. And a triumvirate is a government of three people with equal power. And this was the first triumvirate. So there are some civil wars, and then these three take control. Crassus, who is the richest man in the Roman Empire. Pompey, who's a famous and a Roman general who's won a lot of victories. And Julius Caesar, who's also a famous general who's won a lot of victories. The idea is that these three are going to rule with each other. But sharing power is hard. It becomes more difficult after Crassus dies, and then it just becomes Julius Caesar and Pompey ruling Rome. They would both like to be the only ruler of Rome, so they begin to fight one another. Julius Caesar is actually up in France conquering some people when hostilities break out, and he takes his troops and he crosses the Rubicon, which is a river, and the significance of that was once he took his army and crossed this river, there was no turning back. At that point, him and Pompey were officially sort of fighting a civil war. And crossing the Rubicon exists today as a phrase meaning there's no turning back. And we'll skip to the end of the story. Julius Caesar wins. He defeats Pompey, goes into Rome, and takes over and becomes a dictator, which means an absolute ruler. So he becomes this all-powerful ruler. Remember, Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar were the members of the first triumvirate. Crassus is real wealthy, but he dies. Pompey and Julius Caesar fight for total control of Rome, and Julius Caesar wins, becoming a dictator. So he marches on Rome. He greatly weakens the power of the Senate, and he becomes the just total ruler of Rome. He becomes the dictator. Now, the senators, remember, these are the really, 300 really rich guys who were used to controlling Rome. They don't like this. There's not much they can do at first because he's too powerful, and the people love him. I should have mentioned this before, but the plebeians really like him. That's Julius Caesar's whole thing, is he's supposed to be this man of the people. He's rich himself, but he sort of takes the side of the regular people and is quite popular with regular folks. So the senators can't do anything at first, but they hatch this plan, and they eventually, you can see it in the painting here, they eventually assassinate him. The senators do on the Senate floor. So he's actually like in the big official government building, and these senators pull out these knives and kill him, and it's this big famous thing. The senators then try to reestablish their power over Rome, but Caesar's friends, including his great-nephew and one of his generals, fight back against the senators, and they win. So this is Octavian, otherwise known as Augustus right here, Mark Antony. They beat the senators, and they take over Rome themselves, becoming the second triumvirate. Technically, this guy Lepidus is part of the second triumvirate, but you don't need to worry about him. He's very quickly sidelined. So then you're set up with a system where Augustus, at this point he's known as Octavian, but whatever, it's the same guy, and Mark Antony are ruling Rome. Mark Antony was one of Julius Caesar's, top generals and, a good buddy. Augustus is Julius Caesar's niece's son, and by all accounts, this, very brilliant guy. At this point, something a little bit interesting happens that you might have heard of. Mark Antony goes to Egypt and, by all accounts, legitimately falls in love with Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, the ruler of Egypt at this time. This is an Egyptian depiction of Mark Antony, the Roman guy, and Cleopatra. There are all sorts of movies made about them because they're both these big political figures, and again, they have this, romance. But, of course, things don't end happily because Antony and Augustus can't share power. They can't be nice. They can't share. They fight. They fight in a battle. They fight for control of Rome. And Octavian, otherwise known as Augustus, he wins. He defeats Mark Antony. He defeats Cleopatra. And then Octavian becomes Emperor Augustus. This is when he undergoes the name change. Technically, Julius Caesar never was an emperor. Julius Caesar was, a dictator, but really he controlled everything. Augustus, though, sort of formally becomes an emperor, and from his time to the very end of the Roman Empire, the most powerful ruler in Rome would be the emperor. From then on, the Senate still exists, but its power is nothing like what it was. From then on, it's an empire with a boss. Unlike Julius Caesar, Augustus rules for a very long time. Politically and economically, Rome thrives under his reign. One of the emperors who comes after him is the one that I put right here, is Nero. And the only reason that I want you to just sort of know and remember him, there are a couple emperors between Augustus and Nero, but Nero is quite famous in that he was sort of the classically sort of evil / insane emperor. He, killed anybody who went against him, including his own mother. He was just sort of, just a very sort of insane, sort of nasty guy. And this, again, is one of the weaknesses of having a sole emperor who has all the power, is you could have someone like Augustus, who by all accounts is very sort of intelligent and does a good job ruling, but you can also have someone like Nero who was kind of nuts. And then the last thing I want to leave you with is the Pax Romana. That's a Latin word for Roman peace. This was a period of time where you had the emperors who made, just sort of very good decisions. You had peace throughout the empire. You had prosperity. Things were going really well. So this is this period of time that I sort of want you to know about, because later on things will get worse for Rome. Obviously, they're not even around anymore. But for a while, there's peace. There's prosperity, and everything is great and hunky-dory. This is after Nero, his soldiers would get rid of him. So this is after that. You have these 5 really good emperors, and everything is nice and peaceful and happy. And we'll leave the lecture there today, and we'll tell you about, how things go down later in the week.